avant de commencer les études de journalisme, moi j'avais une vision vraiment sur le côté enquête, le rôle d'enquêteur du journaliste, parce que je suis fan de cinéma, donc moi je voyais les films Les Hommes du Président avec Robert Redford et Dustin Hoffman.
Avant de vouloir devenir journaliste, je voyais les journalistes comme des intellectuels, des gens qui savaient un peu tout ce qui se passait dans le monde. J'étais en admiration, je voyais Jean-Paul Sartre, je voyais des figures comme ça qui fument en discutant politique et qui refont le monde jusqu'à 2h du matin.
Tu leggi i giornali?
No.
Che rapporto hai con i giornali?
Bruttissimo, li uso per andare in bagno.
Ti dicono forza la notizia, forzala perché così attrai il lettore del web.
I inform myself mostly through social media.
That social media presence is right now, right in your hands.
J'ai besoin d'être tout le temps au courant parce que j'ai tout le temps cette peur que quelqu'un me parle d'un événement que moi je n'ai pas vu passer.
Sometimes I feel sorry for the next generation because you have so much information to get.
Do you trust journalism in general?
I would like to.
Uno leggi una notizia magari e dopo un'ora leggi il contrario di tutto di quella notizia.
It's also hard to differentiate between, pundits and journalists and infotainment.
Si parla di 5 euro a pezzo oppure si parla di collaborazioni dove guadagna alla fine del mese tra i 600 e i 700 euro.
Bisognerebbe rallentare, magari anche staccare.
Slow news. Huh.
Slow journalism sounds like a very nice idea, but you can explain it for me?
Sono stato per tanti anni direttore di una testata giornalistica italiana digitale che si chiama Blogo. Producevamo a volte anche 400 articoli al giorno, che ovviamente non potevo leggere tutti, il che per un direttore responsabile è un oggettivo problema, e ha avuto come conseguenza il fatto che questa ossessione di stare sempre attaccato al monitor a guardare non tanto la qualità dei pezzi che venivano prodotti quanto la quantità di click che si facevano mi ha reso un iperteso.
Sono un giornalista e sono pagato per creare polemiche, per creare dibattiti online e fare in modo che arrivino più click possibili nel giornale per cui lavoro, che è poi il motivo per cui mi pagano.
Stiamo trattando le notizie esattamente come se fossero cibo spazzatura. E quindi mi sono detto, visto che per reazione ad un certo punto è nato il movimento slow food nel cibo, non è che da qualche parte nel mondo ci sarà qualcuno che sta facendo qualche cosa che parla di slow news? E quindi l'ho cercato su Google. Ho trovato Peter Lofer, è un professore universitario dell'Oregon che aveva scritto un libro che si intitolava proprio Slow News.
Peter è un personaggio che dovreste conoscere tutti.
Dr. Peter Lofer.
Thank you very much, Professor Morrison, and the two of us have a good vaudeville act, which we may engage in now, but I wanted to just tell you a little bit about slow news. I wrote a book about butterflies, and the Italian language edition came out. I went to talk with my publisher, and we were in a restaurant in Milano having a nice leisurely lunch, and it just was natural that we started to talk about how maybe we should slow down news.
Ciao ragazzi. Ciao. Allora, il primo appuntamento che abbiamo per la disseminazione dell'idea slow news in giro per il mondo è a Perugia.
I mean, in general, everything can be fabricated, and comments can also be fabricated. And what's happening with Facebook's algorithm change is it's valuing comments and discussion as a metric to actually decide whether to give a piece of content more distribution. So what we have now are people gaming comments, and you'll see like hundreds of people who just like put a sticker or, insane amounts of reactions that have all just been automated. So you also just have to question everything you're seeing. The worst thing journalists could do is look at like the problems of misinformation and the problems of falling trust in the media and say, well, this is because of other things. This is because of technology. This is because of Trump. This is because of this or that. We absolutely share some blame in the way that people perceive us. And yes, there are folks who are powerful who are attacking the media right now, but how accountable are we about the work we do? How transparent are we about the work we do? And what do we value in terms of what we cover? You know, the old saying in English is if it bleeds, it leads. And so covering violence, covering conflict, you know, covering things that are maybe light and not as important, over time they can have an impact. So we have to look at ourselves and we have to think about how we adapt what we do to this new world. And I think one of the big things is figuring out, is there a way for us to regain some of the trust that's been lost? Because if you look around the world, I mean, the media is not very trusted at this point in time.
If you want the trust of the public, you have to begin by trusting them.
Che cos'è il genio? È fantasia, intuizione, colpo d'occhio, velocità d'educazione. Il genio è Hermes Maionica. È il principale creatore di bufale italiano, ok? Ne ha create moltissime e hanno avuto moltissimo successo perché lui, oltre a creare le bufale, è capace di farle diventare virali, no? Quindi non semplicemente racconta palle, ma fa in modo che queste palle vengano credute e vengano diffuse.
Le bufale non è solo un problema di questi siti clickbaiting, delle notizie non vere, ma anche giornalisti che, insomma, da questo giornalismo veloce, che alla fine sono anche loro stessi cadono nei tranelli.
A lot of news organizations had their website and were trying to get as much traffic as possible. It was a race to get big, and they wanted scale, and everybody sort of figured out that, oh, you know, you can get a lot of attention by, you know, writing content that generated outrage, by stuff that played to people's biases, and so things certainly got skewed. The incentives were to go a little more extreme. The incentives were to just pump out tons of content.
Many publishers thought you could just make lots of crap, so-called clickbait, and then get lots of money from the advertising. But none of us control pricing in digital. The pricing of digital advertising is controlled by Facebook and Google and other very big players. And it's very hard to be distinctive, to do something different. And the danger for a publisher who bases their model entirely on digital advertising, and particularly on digital display advertising, is you end up making crap which isn't worth paying for and making stuff which is the same as everyone else is doing on the internet.
There has been misinformation forever. There has been propaganda forever. The tools and the techniques change, but at the core of it, people spreading things that they hope to be true or they want to be true or they you know, aligns with their previous beliefs. I mean, that's been going on forever. And if you actually look at some of the first printed news books that would sort of be distributed in coffee shops in like 1500s or what have you, stuff in there was like total bullshit. They were talking about, you know, dragons being found in the woods, and they were talking about the discovery of the Antichrist and all this stuff. And so those origins was often made up. It was fables and tales, and that's what entertained people. But over time, you know, there was this discipline that emerged of actually trying to gather and verify information, of actually trying to inform people. And so that was journalism. But it wasn't always an inherent thing, but telling people stories that entertained them was.
Si parte dal basso, da un gruppo, poi piano piano ci casca qualche blog, no? Che blog è così, poi magari un sito un po' più affermato, alla fine se funziona può arrivare ai giornali. È una specie di divulgazione piramidale al contrario.
When you're actually trying to debunk something, you are restricted to the facts, and you're also coming second because the fake has to get out there for you to debunk it. But the other piece of it that like I struggle with at times, and I think a lot of people do, is that you just sort of seem like an annoying, nagging person to be like, no, that's not true. Like the last thing your friends want when they share something on Facebook is for you to add a comment saying, actually, that's not true, and put a Snopes link, because it's embarrassing to them.
Se ci sono 20 persone su 100 che ci possono cascare, in realtà dopo quelle che interagiscono sono molto di più, che ci può cascare anche qualcuno che non ci crede ma interagisce soltanto per rabbia, perché risponde, casca non nella bufala ma nella provocazione. Bisogna cercare di provocare per far interagire più persone possibili.
There's always been fake news. The digital distribution of fake news at scale, and in particular the habit of some politicians to retweet and to spread fake news and to give it a validity because they treat it as if it's true, I think is new.
La strategia del troll è individuare i gruppi dove può funzionare un tema, e la stessa cosa fanno alcuni politici, riescono a creare dei gruppi social dove raggruppano tutte le persone più o meno polarizzate in quell'idea, e così riescono a innescare delle notizie false là dentro e dare la soluzione, che sono sempre il suo partito politico.
Where they think they can control the truth because they won't be contradicted, because the media won't dare to contradict them.
There is, I think, a good way to make good quality things spread. So that idea of viral as only being a bad thing, we have to reorient that and have journalists think about, how do I get the good stuff to spread?
We not just like to be informed, we get a rush. We get a dopamine rush from that what's next, what's next, what's next. We can't avoid it. We look for it. We check incoming because we want to be wanted and we want to know something more. And that's why I argue here that the onus is on us as consumers. We have to decide to limit and go a day where you walk in the park without these things.
And if you were out taking your walk on 9/11?
If you lived in Manhattan, you would know immediately what was going on because you would see it, smell it, hear it, or somebody would tell you. And if you lived in Eugene, Oregon that day, you did not need to know immediately.
Are slow journalism and social media enemies?
No, the equipment is never an enemy. Not the camera, not your pen, not your recorder. None of these things are enemies. They're all tools. We're the ones who need to be in charge, and we're allowing ourselves too often to be ruled by the tools. But the tools are magic. We want to take advantage of them. We want to enjoy them. We want to make them work for us, not against us.
I think it's no coincidence that so many people have talked about slow news as the digital world has speeded up. But it's also that we're beginning to understand, probably for the first time in decades, that journalism cannot be taken for granted. It's the substance of liberal democracies. It's the information flow that feeds our populations, for good or bad, in liberal democracies. And if it becomes simply another commodity, you do something damaging to the nature of your democracies. However flawed those democracies are, that's what we all live in.
The point about a democracy is you have a marketplace of ideas. You get there and you argue about the way your country should be going. You argue with each other, and in the end you have a vote, this is to put it very simply, and a certain path is taken for a period of time. But that requires you to have a conversation. And the less conversation there is, because media doesn't enable that conversation, the more challenged democracy is. Again, that is nothing new, but a history of the last century does not suggest that abolishing liberal democracy is going to necessarily make people any happier.
It was the idea of starting from slow food, but I think those three principles of slow food really apply to this situation, which are that it needs to be good, it needs to be clean, and it needs to be fair. As a professor of language and culture, I've been bringing students here for years to show them a different way of life. Because I think in the United States, everything is too fast all the time, like fast food, and I just appreciate the culture where people slow down and take time to eat and take time to enjoy each other's company.
At the core of fake news and all these things, you have unpaid journalism. Yeah. That's the key. You have people that have to write tons of brief articles without being able to do research.
Per condizioni lavorative dignitose non si intende soltanto il salario alla fine del mese,
ma il tempo che devo passare dietro un computer, il mio diritto a uscire per strada a vedere ciò che accade e non semplicemente stare dietro uno schermo ad aspettare che le cose accadano.
We need what I will call a positive economy. That's an expression by the French poet Arthur Rimbaud, and he defined positive economy as something that will allow him to write poetry, but at the same time being able to eat and to survive. Pour les musiciens, le live est aujourd'hui le cœur du modèle économique. Un musicien, il gagne peu sa vie aujourd'hui par la vente de CD et un peu par Spotify, Deezer. Par contre, il arrive très fortement à gagner sa vie à travers des live events. Au fond, qu'est-ce que c'est le live pour un écrivain, pour un journaliste? Ce sont les conférences. Et donc, la clé, c'est que les conférences doivent être rémunérées pour ces écrivains et ces journalistes. The most important battle is to make sure that quality news survives for everybody, not just an elite that have the money, time and education, but everybody has access. You can't make people believe things, but you can give them choices in terms of the information they have about a story or a situation. So one of the most important things that mainstream media must do is learn not to repeat the rumours that come from disinformation. This is a battle for verified facts in proper context, for the significance of stories, and actually I think it's a battle for the quality of our democracies, because information, proper information, is the lifeblood of those democracies. It's one of the reasons after the Second World War so much public money went into creating impartial newsrooms, public service broadcasters, because we just lived through a conflagration that started off with massive propaganda. The heart of slow news, at the heart of quality journalism, is explaining a complex world in an accessible way to broad audiences without reducing the complexity to such an extent that it's like a caricature. And that's a really big challenge for people, journalists and producers and documentary makers and the rest. It is not an easy task. So slow news is incredibly important in that sense, but we shouldn't underestimate the difficulties.
Good morning. I'm going to have to turn on my radio voice clearly. Good morning and a hearty welcome to the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communications Slow News and More Slow Conference.
A school shooting, a breaking news shooting, this is the very definition of fast news. And what happens is it happens on social media. People post video, they post tweets, they ask what's going on. People are watching it, things are happening, all this stuff is going on, and you need to get that information out.
What we see are these breaking news reports filled with speculation, often with misinformation. We have details of the perpetrator that emerge. We then have these reporters and pundits questioning whether or not it was an act of terrorism. We then see politicians responding with thoughts and prayers, as well as these debates about mental health coverage and gun control.
We interview people. That's what we do. So I've done it. I've covered a mass casualty. I don't have any psychological training. I've never been giving it. When I show up at a scene where there's a crime, what do? I do the same thing as I do when I show up at the first day of summer in the swimming pool. What I'm learning is that trauma victims have tricky memories and that they don't always remember everything that happened in clarity. What I'm learning is that asking them to repeat something over and over, which is what happens when 20 journalists show up and talk to somebody and nobody feels like they can leave because what if she says something good now, and nobody wants to disappoint their editor. As that goes on, that's not psychologically healthy for the people who we're interviewing. It's not the same as interviewing somebody else, but we treat it like it is. We have to wait until we know who the victims are. So during those hours and hours that this take, where did the focus on this case go? It went to the perpetrator.
All of this plays out usually within 2 to 3 days. This story usually falls off of the news media agenda 3 days, maybe a week if it happens to be an especially tragic mass shooting, which is a terrible sentence to have to even say.
What we do is, when there's breaking news, we show up, we do it, and then people get tired of us and we leave.
It's been lovely to see how many women are involved with this, because as Peter was introducing me as editor, I often have to clarify with people when they say, what do you do at the Weekly? And I say, I'm the editor. And they're like, oh, which part? And I'm like, really, the whole thing. Like, I'm the editor, swear to God. And it takes them a minute to actually believe that. They're pretty sure there's someone lurking in the background. And I'm like, no, the only person in the background is the other woman who actually owns the paper. The Weekly itself was founded in the 1980s, and it was called What's Happening. It was founded by a collective of women who were passionate about the community, they were passionate about politics and the arts, and they just wanted to get that out to the community. And so that's what they did, and it was very pie in the sky. They didn't have a whole lot of funding for it. They actually would trade. We'll give you an advertisement if you give us coffee. We'll give you an advertisement if you give us breakfast. And they sustained the paper that way. One of the values of an alt weekly is this local focus, this connection to the community, the in-depth reporting and storytelling that is affected by the digital age, but is not destroyed by it. And that's what, again, brings me to slow news. When Peter first brought up the topic with me, I have to admit I wasn't all that familiar with slow news as a specific concept, but more I went, oh, well, that's actually what we've been doing. That's what alt weeklies, many of them, have been doing. It's what our focus is. These small communities are often where these really big stories get launched, and small community papers are often the source for things. I mean, look at Michigan, the Flint water crisis. That didn't start with a national story. That started with a small community story that then became huge. A kind of maybe an odd comparison, but if you've ever read Stephen King, the horror novelist, yeah. When you read his books, it's never just he picked up a candy bar. It's never just he drove a car. It's always he picked up a Reese's Pieces. He drove a Corvette. He gives everything something that you can relate to, that sort of moment where you're like, oh, I eat that candy. Oh, I drive that car. Or I've seen one of those. It's never generic. It's never general. It's always very, very specific. And I think that's something with a local story where there's an element of specificity that you have in there. So people are like, that's my neighbor. That's the street that's 2 doors down from me. That people sort of look at, and it gives them that sense of like, this is happening to me in my area. That doesn't make as much sense if you're doing a sort of a more global story. They don't need to know that it was on Friendly Street.
The idea for slow journalism really came about because we were talking about storytelling and narrative. And narrative is such a key part of what we do, and of course a good story has a narrative arc, it has twists, it has plot development, and it has hopefully an ending. And I think part of the problem with fast journalism is you don't get the middle bit, you don't get the ending.
Urban farms are 2-acre, thereabouts, outdoor classroom laboratory that's here at the University of Oregon, where we host about 325 students a year come to learn primarily how to grow food. And when you start teaching about growing food, it turns into a lot of other conversations. We try to get them to start thinking about the choices they make when they're buying their food, right? And you do it from the ground up, right? You start with the ground and teach them tools. We depend on a massive industrial system that has divorced our understanding for a lot of people about food. There's a price to pay for efficiency. You know, the price is expensive.
Food and Freedom is about a slow food movement. There's Slow Food Nation, the Slow Food Revolution, and Terra Madre is about a global network of sustainable communities. So it's not just about you, the individual person, doing what's right for you, you know, what you enjoy or whatnot, but about connecting with other people, with farmers markets and CSAs and all of these other strategies.
Heaven is this table of food, all the most beautiful food that this guy ever seen. And he looks at it and he goes, yes, this is heaven. And he goes to sit down and he realizes he can't reach it. His hand is just too short. All the food is right there, but he cannot reach it. And he says, this cannot be heaven. And his host says, oh, well, you get the long fork. And they give him a long fork. Now he can reach all his food. And he's like, heaven. And then he realizes with the fork, you can't turn it and eat. It's too long. He said, this cannot be heaven. And then his friends came, and everybody could feed each other. And that's what heaven is, right?
Maybe people need hope, not just that things can be slightly less bad than they are, but that something good lies ahead, you know, that we can have a grand vision to strive for rather than just thinking, you know, in small terms. Maybe we do need to think bigger.
It's my great pleasure to introduce from our School of Music and Dance here at the University of Oregon, Won Kim.
When you think of the lower pitch in physical sense, they operate in a much slower frequency. So if you want to make the connection with the slowness, lower is slow by definition. Of course, we do need all spectrum of everything, the fast, slow, loud dynamic, soft dynamic. But I think the most effective way to catch the audience is rather than pouring our number of notes and dynamic into the audience, but is to draw everybody in towards you. And that works when things are slow, when things are soft, when things are calm.
One of the most interesting things that we are discovering now doing this documentary is that in a lot of parts of the world there are many people that they are building many products. What we are trying to do is just make a network of this idea.
It's a good idea.
And try to spread with a little bit much louder voice.
Delayed gratification started as an idea in 2010, and Matthew and I had met back in about 2004 when we were both working in Dubai on Time Out magazine. I was the editor, he was the food critic, and along with three other guys, we were making this magazine, we were having lots of fun, working through the night. We were learning how to make magazines, we were young, we were enjoying it, we were going out and seeing the city and the region and so on. And then it came to 2010, we were all back in London, and we started talking about the media landscape that we saw and how awful it was. Is that about right?
Pretty much, yeah. I think that was the first time we used the phrase slow journalism that night. Yeah. But we knew we wanted to make a magazine with a focus on long-form narrative non-fiction.
In the face of the internet, the entire news publishing industry was still panicking, still had no idea how to deal with it. So we all had this background in print magazines. We thought, let's do something that's the opposite of what people were talking about. Let's do something that is print instead of digital. Let's do something that looks at a 3-month period instead of giving an immediate knee-jerk reaction. Let's do something that is funded by readers and subscribers rather than advertisers.
The story about Zetland begins with me and my 3 co-founders. We all had fine jobs in legacy media. We realized that if the tradition for the solid, the good reported stories that was used to be linked to paper, if it had to survive, someone had to do it in a digital version. And so we quit our jobs, and then we founded Zetland. It's a digital newspaper that publish only very few stories a day, 2-3 stories a day. It's about what's going on in the world, so it's news in that sense, but we connect the dots. We not only say that, so this happened, but we also try to say it happened because of this, and then maybe we also have to understand that in order to grapple with the issue. And that takes time.
Il giornale è uscito il primo numero nel novembre del 93. Io avevo 26-27 anni ed ero il più anziano del gruppo e l'unico con un po' di esperienza nel campo del giornalismo. Gli altri 4, che sono 4 dei vice direttori attuali ancora oggi, facevano l'università all'epoca, chi storia dell'arte, chi lettere e filosofia, chi scienze politiche. Erano i miei amici comunque andavano in vacanza. Anche se era molto duro e difficile, lavoravamo un sacco, avevamo stipendi ridicoli, eccetera, facevamo un giornale che era nostro.
I was editor-in-chief of a print newspaper where I tried to change the idea of what is news already in that existing traditional print newspaper. And I failed because I was fired. People said, this is not news. The word today is not in the newspaper anymore. And I said, well, I don't want the word today in the newspaper anymore because it doesn't tell you anything about the world we live in. So I was fired, and then I thought, let's do it ourselves. I went on the TV and said, this is my idea. If you support the idea, become a member. We set a world record in crowdfunding. We had almost $1.7 million, and we could start the correspondent. We didn't really know what we were doing, so so it took a couple of months, and we were like, hopefully this works.
It was 2008. Me and my colleague Astrid, we're working both for Marie Claire, the glossy magazine, and we were sort of disappointed sometimes about stories in the magazine because they were never about our lives. Our lives were just with a lot of pressure and small kids, and we felt like we failed all the time because we did not have the right clothes or the right bags or the right sunglasses. And we thought, it's so strange that there's not a magazine about us and our lives and what goes wrong in our lives. And I talked to my doctor about it, and she said, maybe you can do a mindfulness course. That's something new. Sort of nobody had heard about it 10 years ago. But she said, I think this will help you be a bit more relaxed and to slow down a bit and have a new view on your life. So I went there and I asked Astrid, my colleague, I said, maybe it's something also for you. And we went there for 8 weeks. We did a mindfulness-based stress reduction training. And there we learned so many lessons about life. Awareness and attention was such a powerful tool. And we thought, let's try to put those lessons in the magazine. So that's how we started the magazine Flow.
For the longest time, we didn't really interact with our readers. And I always said, I'm fed up of brands trying to be my best friend. Like, so can we just give you a little survey? What do you think of this? Do you think this was great? Can you choose our cover online? All this sort of stuff. I was like, no, if this is anything, this is old school. This is not interactive. We'll make something great, and if you like it, continue to buy it, and if you don't, that's fine, don't worry about it. And then I was relating this to this guy who was giving us some business advice. He was a lovely guy from Barcelona, and he liked the magazine, and he was a big publishing brain. And he said, so what's your interaction with your readers? And I was like, well, we don't do it because of this. And he was like, no. That's not the reason you don't talk to your readers. You don't talk to your readers because you're scared that they don't like your magazine and they'll tell you something that you don't want to hear. I was like, yeah, that is actually it. that is correct. So we try to be better about it. We have these really regular events now where we actually get to meet and speak to people.
Vale la pena segnalare certamente Ferrara, il festival, nato un po' per caso, ma insomma che poi è cresciuto ed è diventato per la redazione e per i lettori un momento di incontro fondamentale.
We have live shows where we put journalism on stage in a theater and meet with 1,000 members at a time and share stories from a theater stage. Maybe you should come when we have one of these live shows.
Yes.
Because there's definitely another kind of
When you were talking, I thought that we have to interview your members.
Yeah, that could be fun.
I think being able to meet the guys who write the articles is, first of all, it's a lot of fun, but second of all, you get to feel that there are people behind the news that you read.
I think it's great. It's on time that we do it a little bit different. I mean, it's 2018. Come on. Okay. Let's try a lot of different new things. Maybe something will not work, but this really works.
Tonight we're doing a journalistic live show. We call it Zetland Live. And tonight it's about a book that Sarah have been writing.
This is the first time it's my book. I'm on stage. Normally we would have different journalists talk about, there might be like a theme, and then we have different journalists with each their story, but still with the effects of the theater. This time it's just me.
We are trying to take journalism into the stage of a theater, and this is the theater we're in tonight.
The article is not the end. The article is like the beginning of, this is where we start talking.
Ned med noget skole. Sådan her, ja. Tager vi lidt skole.
We've had some really special conversations, I think, afterwards. I love that part of it, that you can actually meet the people that you write to. And in this show, we're also going to end it with like a debate where people can say whatever they want to me, which is a bit exciting. So I have no idea what they will say. I don't think it's necessarily just for niche media. This is the way we have to go.
One of the TV news channels here has got a claim about, just always being first to the news. I'm like, but you can be, but that's not really what we want. We want to be right, rather than being kind of first. So almost going the other way and being like, always last to breaking news.
Everywhere, the news has some basic ingredients. It's about unusual, sensational, exceptional events that happen on a specific day. So although the news promises to give you a picture of the world that tells you what is happening in the world, it is actually the opposite. It tells you what is not happening on a daily basis, because the normal, the unsensational, the ordinary, is not in the picture. Mm-hmm. And because of this, the most influential developments, the most influential structures in society that kind of explain these unusual events that you see in the news are left out completely. The metaphor we always use here is news is about the weather, but it's not about the climate.
You can read the magazine whenever you want, this week or next month or next year. There is no pressure in it, and it just gives you a good feeling about your life and how to deal with life. So this is something people want to read about all over the world.
News not only misrepresents the world in a fundamental way, but it also leaves you cynical, it makes us more divided, and it shows the world in a way that kind of makes you feel powerless. It's like you're the audience of this world that gets worse every day, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's why people also get frustrated so much. Suppose you are locked up in a room for 20 years, and you just see the news, just cable news all day, and you have a newspaper. No books, no other people to talk to, just news. Would you go outside after
never.
20 years? No way would I go outside, because it would be some kind of war crazy. People would be like, I would not trust anybody. I would be cynical. I would feel powerless completely. I would cannot change anything about this. This is the kind of worldview you would really like a population to have if you say, hey, just give me the power, I will fix it all. This dangerous world out there, I will fix it. You cannot, I can.
Il fatto che il nostro stipendio è pagato in larghissima misura da chi ci compra e da chi ci legge ti mette in un ascolto, diciamo, no? Diverso nei confronti di chi ti legge.
If there's a third party financing it, you will have a different objective.
It changes the relationship between media and reader and user, because then the user, the reader, becomes the product.
Advertisers are not interested in informing the reader. Advertisers are interested in targeting specific kinds of people that would be interested in buying their product.
Their attention becomes the product that we can sell to ad companies.
Very basic model for a century.
We have another paywall model that was inspired by The Correspondent in Holland. So it works this way.
We don't have a paywall. If people want to read anything we do, they can. If they find a shared link, they can read the whole thing without limit. It just says on top of the article, this article has been given to you as a gift by paying member and then the name of the member. So people understand this is free for me, but somebody else made it possible that it was written.
So our members help us spread the word about our content, and they want to do that. And on the same time, they help us spread our content.
We like to call our readers the people formerly known as the audience. Engaged citizens that want to be informed about the world around them. And you establish a new kind of relationship directly by them having to finance your journalism and you collaborating with them on that journalism. A lot of people amongst our readers have some kind of expertise. They're either doctors or teachers or climate scientists or something else. And we ask them, help us understand these things that are important to all of us. So in a sense, you form some kind of knowledge community of people who want to understand the world around them and help each other.
Il giornale, un po' come tutti i giornali, ma certamente internazionale, sono un prodotto collettivo, di un'intelligenza collettiva, diciamo. Che il fatto che ci sia una maggioranza di donne, anche 2 delle 4 vice direttrici sono donne, quello è un elemento che ha contribuito a fare il giornale nel modo in cui è, alle relazioni e alle dinamiche dentro la redazione. Quelle sono cose che appunto magari non hanno a che vedere con il fatto che facciamo un giornale, più a che vedere in generale con il clima che si respira in una società, tra un gruppo di persone, eccetera, eccetera, e certamente sono stato un elemento che ha influito.
Every morning we meet and say which stories are important for our readers to know, not tomorrow, but next week.
I think it's important that the values you have as a publication has to be the same values that that's throughout the organization. So if we say that we are honest and transparent and humorous sometimes in the way we do journalism, that's how we want everything to be. Our meetings, the way we talk to each other, the way we talk to our members, the way we answer questions on Facebook. So we hope that the tone that we have when we sing in the morning or we have meetings is the same tone that we have in our journalism, and that feeling will somehow manifest itself as something that makes us credible and feel like people doing important work that we think is important, and that will, in some way, you will be able to feel that on the other side.
always focus on problems and solutions. We never tell you what's wrong unless we can also give you some kind of perspective or ask you for some kind of perspective on how we can fix it.
L'altro giorno ho fatto una discussione con un direttore di un giornale che non nominerò ovviamente, che a un certo punto ha sbottato e mi ha detto sì, è vero, noi perdiamo il 5% di copie ogni anno, però sono arrivato alla conclusione che è colpa dei lettori. Cosa si può dire a qualcuno che pensi che sia colpa dei lettori?
Non lo so. Che continuerà a perdere il 5% di copie all'anno.
Et comment on fait dans un monde idéal pour allouer les aides? Mais je dis que si les médias sont des fondations, eh bien, pensons l'aide de l'État comme une subvention aux dons qui sont faits à ces fondations. Donc très précisément, ce que je dis, c'est que voilà, on a des médias à but non lucratif qui peuvent recevoir des dons de la part des citoyens et l'État va abonder ces dons. Donc je donne 100 € à America et l'État derrière va donner 200 € supplémentaires. L'État n'a pas du tout son mot à dire, puisque pour le coup, le choix de soutenir tel ou tel média est vraiment fait par les citoyens. Le système est clair et complètement transparent. Ça permet quoi, en plus d'avoir un financement public des médias? Ça permet de faire rentrer les citoyens dans le jeu et de rendre d'une certaine manière les citoyens actionnaires, entre guillemets, de leurs médias. Et ça, c'est le second aspect de la société de médias à but non lucratif, c'est de repenser la gouvernance des médias, de limiter le pouvoir des plus gros actionnaires extérieurs et de donner davantage de pouvoir, c'est-à-dire de droit de vote, aux citoyens d'une part et aux journalistes de l'autre. Ensuite, je pense que mon modèle, ça va permettre de faire émerger de nouveaux médias indépendants et ça se fera au détriment d'un certain nombre de médias existants qui ont perdu leur indépendance, notamment par rapport à leurs actionnaires. Pour moi, c'est pas un problème qu'il y ait des médias qui meurent, tant qu'il y en a de nouveaux qui se créent. Ce qui est important, c'est qu'il y ait autant de cartes de presse, pour le dire vite, ou plus de journalistes. C'est le journalisme qui compte, c'est pas que telle ou telle marque apparaisse ou disparaisse. Et puis après, moi, mon modèle, c'est un pari pour l'avenir. C'est-à-dire qu'en démocratisant la gouvernance des médias, en développant des médias à but non lucratif, l'idée, c'est de récupérer petit à petit la confiance.
Noi siamo passati dal dire che no, Twitter e i social network avevano prodotto Obama e le primavere arabe a demonizzarli perché producono Trump e i populismi insomma è sempre quello però, quindi forse c'è un problema altrove.
Facebook, quel rôle a eu jusqu'ici dans cette crise? Quel rôle peut avoir aussi en positif pour sortir de ça?
Il faut les taxer. Il faut redistribuer l'argent de Facebook à ceux qui produisent du journalisme. Et je dis bien, il faut les taxer. C'est-à-dire qu'on a de plus en plus Google, Facebook, qui font soi-disant preuve de charité. En disant, écoutez, oui, c'est vrai, on utilise des contenus, et d'ailleurs on a besoin de ces producteurs de contenu, donc on va leur faire la charité. Et on va leur donner quelques millions d'euros, sachant que ce qu'ils leur donnent, en fait, c'est vraiment une goutte d'eau par rapport, à ce qu'ils ont coûté aux médias traditionnels, et puis deux, à ce qu'ils gagnent eux-mêmes grâce au contenu produit par ces médias traditionnels. Donc moi, je pense que ces principaux acteurs, il faut les taxer fortement au niveau européen, au niveau également des États-Unis. Il faut les taxer fortement et ensuite il faut mettre en place un système de redistribution de cet argent en faveur des différents médias. Et là où il faudra être extrêmement attentif, c'est sur la gouvernance finalement de cette agence qui redistribuera l'argent levé auprès des grandes plateformes. Il faudrait se dépêcher. Non, mais c'est un peu comme la crise du climat, c'est-à-dire que ça fait tellement longtemps que ça a commencé et en même temps c'est tellement urgent d'agir, donc le plus vite sera le mieux. Ensuite, ce qui est intéressant, c'est de savoir dans quelle mesure cette crise des médias est un symptôme ou une cause du populisme. En fait, c'est une espèce de cercle vicieux.
News is about the first time stuff happens. Usually it's not, but it's what they think it's about. Journalists think, this is new because it's the first time. Most things in the world that are actually important are repetitions. You cannot say, today the climate changed.
No, it is changing.
It is changing. We know it changed, but you cannot say today it changed. And because you cannot say today it changed, the phenomenon itself is never news. It's always news because something else, like for example a demonstration or a report or some politician who says something crazy about it, that is news. But it's never the fact itself is never news, which is, considering its impact, completely crazy.
Du coup, finalement, il faut avoir espoir pour le prochain.
Il faut toujours avoir espoir. On est trop jeunes pour être défaitistes.
Years ago, when I wrote the book, Slow News, it was a hope, but it's happening. And what's amazing is the way it's happening around the globe with different people in different places using different media, all realizing without talking with each other, without hearing about each other's work, are practicing slow news. And now that slow news movement is coming together, and we're finding each other. And it's making the movement more powerful because we can learn from each other, we can share information, techniques, ideas, personnel, and that noise will always be there, but compensated by good journalism. And it's no longer just a hope.
Journalism is changing. A lot of people say that it's a dying field. I think it's just evolving in many different aspects of telling information and receiving it as well. And I'm excited to be a part of journalism, and I'm excited to be a part of that generation that can change the way that we spread news and share information. So.